Okay, so this one I'm going to cover the enemy spawner, how to make this a little bit more functional than just walking into it and plopping enemies. So what it actually does right now is, yeah, literally, there's a large box and it will spawn enemies anywhere within that box. Um, and if I edit it and just go through it, so active begin overlap. So, and then it looks for the hero and it starts a timer. And this is how many enemies to spawn per second. This is the first thing that we're actually going to do to increase the functionality of our enemy spawner. Just going to click this little eyeball here. And in this tooltip, I'm just going to write how many enemies to spawn per second. You compile that and we go back to the map. Now, if you look over here in the details, we've got this default section, enemies per second. Now, if I change that to, I don't know, 1,000, and we go into here, there we go. Now, it's spawning 1,000 enemies per second, but there's another variable, um, max enemies allowed. So that is over here. Click the little eyeball. And so what's this doing is making the variable public, and that's when it starts to get. So if I compile and save that again, just close down these other tabs that we don't need. So, and then I'll look at this. It's there again. Now, the reason it's yellow is because it doesn't have a tooltip. And it would work absolutely fine, but as a responsible designer, programmer, you would always provide your designers tooltips. So, how many enemies can this spawner produce at once? Yes. Right, because that's what it does. So now, if I change that to 500, when I go into here, oh, there we go. Yeah, yeah, the frame rates are very good on that. Probably shouldn't have done that while I was recording. Hopefully, that didn't break it. But so that straight away has added some functionality to our spawner. But let's make that a bit more sensible now. 10 and 10. Now, I have this other project that I've worked on, just working out the kinks before I create these tutorials, so I have sort of a script to go from. And this is the tutorial enemy spawner that I've created. And what this will do, so it's got max enemies active, enemies per second, wave amount, what enemies to spawn, spawn box collision size, and the trigger box collision size. So we can see now when we click it, we've got this box here and this box here, and this blue circle, that's just the light radius, so we don't need to worry about that. What we care about is this little orange box. So if I start changing the spawn box size, this is where my enemies will spawn. They will, and if I want to move that around, I can just click on the spawn box and move it. So if I were to put this over to the right here and go back to here and make this just very small. So my enemies can only spawn now in this little square here. So when I walk into this, so they can spawn anywhere within that square, but only there. And so that's the sort of functionality that we were going to create throughout this video. So I'm going to move this back over here and start working with our one. So let's open up our blueprint. Now, just to be extra kind to those people who are a bit more advanced, I'm just going to bring back the finished spawner and just show you. So you could, if you wanted to, just copy this. And that is, or you would, if you created what I just showed you here, you'll get that that spawner with these variables. But I'll just go over this now, step by step. So let's go back to that one there. We want this one. Okay. So we're going to want to change a few things. So we've got this box. Let's call this the trigger box. I'm also going to lose the face cam just in case it gets in the way. There we go. And then I'm going to also attach to that a point light. Now you don't need to do this. This is just so I've got a visual representation of where this spawner is, where the trigger box is. You might want this, you might not. But for me, I just want that just for designer purposes. If you might want it in your game design, like in the editor, but off in the game, so you can always type in hidden and just click hidden in game, so you can't actually see it there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add another box collision, and this one I just want it parented to the scene root. Hang on. There we go. And this one I'm going to call spawn box. So if I press F2 to start renaming it, spawn box. And I'm just going to add a point light to that as well. And just cover that. So now we've got that. I'm going to create all of our variables that we need now as well. So we're going to need a Boolean. The Boolean is a true or false type of variable. It's only got two states that it can be in. And I'm going to call this enemies left, question mark. The next one I'm going to create is an integer. An integer is just a number, and this one's going to be called wave progress. I'm going to change max enemies allowed name to max enemies active. And I'm going to create another variable. I'm just going to duplicate this wave progress and rename this one to wave amount without a hashtag in, and make that one exposed as well. And this one is going to have the tooltip of this is the max allowed enemies to spawn ever. So max enemies active is how many enemies can the spawner produce at any one time. The enemies per second is how many enemies to spawn per second. And the wave amount is the maximum allowed enemies to spawn ever. After that, we need to create another variable. There. And for this one, we need to do a type pawn. So if we click there, and it needs to be a class reference to pawn. And if we compile that, and we also need to click this little pawn and turn it into an array. So what this means is it's changed the default value to like a drop down here. So if I compile that, and it's got no array elements. An array is just another word for a list. Drop that down, and let's say enemy character, and then do enemy character again. So now we've got two types of thing in our list to spawn, which we'll have access to later. We're also going to expose this one so that we can change what enemies we can spawn from our different spawners. So we might want it to spawn lots of we might want a whole wave of weak grunts, or a whole wave of mixed shooting enemies and rushing enemies, or something like that. And we're going to call this enemies to spawn, and a list of all possible enemies to spawn. Okay. Now we want back to just normal variable type, and we want a vector. Now a vector has three parts to it: an X, Y, and a Z, or an RG and a B, whatever you want to call it, really. And it's just a coordinate system, really. And it stores those three variables in for locations, really. If we call this one spawn box collision, and we duplicate this one and call it trigger box collision. And then finally, we just need one more variable. I'm going to type integer, and this one's just going to be called counter. We're just going to use this to check when our wave has finished later on. Okay. So now we've got that. We're going to click our trigger box, and we're going to do on component begin overlap. We're going to plus that. And so rather than just overlapping with the whole actor now, we're specifically seeing if you have triggered the trigger box, and we're going to drag other actor into there. So when we do that, and we can just delete this one. Okay. And then that is that part done. That's our trigger box working absolutely fine. So now every second, because it's divided by 1, and this default value is 1, it's going to call spawn enemy. So what we need to do is give ourselves some extra space here. And we're going to start with a branch. A branch always has a condition in it. And we're going to check if the wave progress and wave amount, we're going to get both of these, okay? And we're going to check if the wave progress, if the wave amount is less than the wave progress. So start typing less than integer there. And if it is, go into there, we will do another check. We'll get enemies left. We'll set enemies left with false. And branch again. Just plug that into there and click true. So what will happen is if the wave amount is not less than enemies left, no, then the if a wave progress is less than the wave amount, it will fire true. That's what will happen. And if it isn't, it's going to set enemies left to false, which means that we can destroy the actor. There we go. Got there in the end. The next thing that we're going to do, we're going to grab get all actors of class and cook that up to true. And move this over to here. And move that branch over to here. And the reason this will work, even if we have different enemies, is because they all will inherit from our enemy character. If we make any different custom characters that don't inherit from that, this max enemies active won't quite work as well. If we were to spawn anything else that didn't inherit directly from the enemy character. But we're going to now get our enemies to spawn. And we're going to drag out of here. I'm going to start having length. And that gets the number of items in an array. And we are going to -1 from that. So we're getting the whole length of it and just subtracting 1. And we are going to do random int in range. The reason we've -1 from it is because an array counts from 0. But this length will give us the 1 to, say if there were 5 in there, it will give us 1 to 5 rather than 0 to 4, which the array counts from 0, 1. So that's why we just have to -1 from here. And then we're just going to type get, and we're going to get a copy, and hook that up to there. So what we're doing is plugging that into here. So now it will spawn AI from the class, and the logic goes, get how long this list is. It's too long. We're going to -1 and get a random int from minimum 0 to the length of it -1, which will be 1 now, and pick one randomly from the spawn. And then we just need to replace this trigger box with the spawn box. Go. And then we want to go to wave progress, get wave progress, and we just want to do ++ increment int. And what that will do is just every single time add 1 to the specified value, then set it. Okay. Finally, I think actually clear timer by function name. Don't think we need to do that. Yeah, that's fine. So that should now work. Our spawner looks like this. And then this is the only sort of fiddly bit, is to move the spawn box around. We have to move that like this. But if we click back up to here now, I just need to make sure. Yeah, we need to make these visible as well. So spawn box size. Trigger box size. Okay. So now I can, I don't know, I type in 100, 100, 100, and 100, 100, 100. And of course, right, that isn't changing anything because they're not hooked up to anywhere. So we just need to go into this thing here, construction script, and just do a little bit more blueprint. Really, really fast one. So we're going to grab the trigger box, and we're going to grab the spawn box. We're going to grab the spawn box collision. We're going to drag the trigger box collision, and we're going to right click and do set box extent of that one. Oh, yeah. In fact, yeah, we'll just do that instead. Set box extent. There we go. And set box extent. There we go. Sorry, that was very messy, the way I did that. There we go. Now, when we type into these variables, let's say should file save, and I'm just going to give these a default value as well. Same for all of these. Just going to make sure that's 10, that's fine. That's 5, that's fine. Enemies left should be, by default, be ticked. Wave progress should be, by default, 0. Wave amount, by default, should probably be like 10. This is just so that everything will work. Enemies to spawn is just the same enemy by default, and then you can change them later. Got a size in this, 100, 100, 100. 100, 100, 100. You could change them to 1,000 as well. And our counter, we don't actually use the counter, so we can just delete that. There we go. Okay then, so now, and I go into here. What I'm going to do is just delete this enemy spawner and drag in another one. There we go. And if we get the spawn box, we can move that over here. And go back to here. So max enemies active at once is 10. Enemies per second, it'll spawn 5 enemies per second. Wave amount will be 10. What enemies it can spawn can be added in here, and you can just keep adding more in there. You can change the size of these in here, and that's it now. So you can start having, walking into a room and then having the enemies come at you from a corridor or from spawning behind you to chase you, wherever you want your enemies to be spawning. And I'll just show you this working as well. There we go. So one last quick thing, just because they still have the debug lines on. If you go into spawn box and just click on hidden in game, trigger box, hidden in game, hidden in game. There you go. That's pretty much everything for this tutorial. It was a bit of a long one, but thanks for sticking to it.